We're doing one of our regular focus on panels where we get together three experts or people that I believe are experts in their field. I guess we'll find out. And we just talk about a topic that hopefully is of relevance to any small business out there that finds this video wherever that may be. So if you are listening to this, whether you're listening to it live or on a replay, feel free to put any questions or comments in the comments wherever you are, and we should be able to bring that up on the screen so we can address those live if we have to, or if not, get back to them later. So before we sort of kick off, if we just go around the room and just let these guys introduce themselves and let you know who they are. So Gail.
Thanks, Paul. My name is Gail Parker, and I'm a data protection specialist at Data Sense. So I help businesses to understand. Can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Paul. We can hear you.
Can hear you.
I can't hear any of you guys.
So I help small businesses to understand how to implement good processes within data protection, and then train their staff in how to implement that.
Okay, for some reason I went on mute. I don't know why. Well, sorry, my speakers went on mute. So sorry about that. I'm back. Russell, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Paul. Russell Parker from QRB. And we like to bring education back into training. So we specialise in project management and service management training solutions for organisations to help them work more efficiently and effectively.
What a cunning plan. And Chris?
Everyone, for those who don't know me, I'm the other part of Data Sense. I look after the technical side of things. So I'm the technical director. I help clients with their IT issues, things like their inability to use a set of speakers properly. So
I didn't press anything. I don't know why all of a sudden decided to sort of switch the sound off. Anyway, we managed to sort of like work it out by pressing a few buttons, which is all IT is about at the end of the day, Chris, isn't it? Really, to be honest.
Absolutely.
So the topic we're going to discuss is about the importance of processes within your business, anybody's business. So I've got a few opinions on that, but I'm going to open it up to the floor to start off with. And I'm going to come to you, Russell, first on location in your cupboard, as we established earlier. So you're involved in project management and numerous tools, I guess, geared at having businesses look at the processes within their business. So what are some of those tools? What do businesses tend to use, and what are some of the advantages of looking at the processes within a business, would you say?
Well, of course, the most important process is to open the cupboard door and let Russell out.
Yeah, that's a good start.
Kind of happens. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of the kind of frameworks that we educate people in that will have a series of processes in them. And I think you can't really beat a good, well-designed, well-applied process, which is, I think, where the key is more than anything else. I think the worry with it is that when somebody mentions the word process, we automatically think of the word bureaucracy. And if we put process in, we add administration and bureaucracy to a horrendous level, which makes it very difficult to do. So I like to have well-applied processes because I think you could apply a process to anything. And I think that the difficulty is in organisations that I see is where that is not done correctly for their environment. You know, we all work in different ways. We all work in different industries and different environments in how we cope with what we do. It's just a question of trying to come up with a process for ourselves that helps us to respond to actions in our business rather than reacting to them, which is where we all kind of like run around in chaos trying to invent new solutions for new events when they occur. I think if you've got a process, you're more able to respond to things that occur to you, and you're able to respond quicker and more effectively.
Yeah, I think on that, as you touched on, when you mention process, in my head, I always think of copious manuals sort of like lined up on a shelf, defining how the business works. And I think that's what puts people off whenever you mention that. But every business has processes in it. that's a fact. Whether they're documented or not is another thing. But I think it's important to say that it doesn't have to be war and peace when you're documenting processes. I mean, certainly at the age I'm at, I do need some sort of step-by-step just checklist, really, just to make sure that I'm not forgetting the process in whatever it might be within my business. So yeah, it can just be checklist, can't it? It can just be step by step.
And it's about not having too much, but also not having it too simple. That you lose it. I mean, for those of us that are watchers of the Great British Bake Off last week would have seen a technical challenge with a 2-step process where step one was turn the oven on, and step 2 was make a lemon meringue pie, and that was it. I don't know, if you give that to me, I'm going to struggle because I don't know the basics of making pastry. But hey, 8 lemon meringue pies appeared. So it's all about the right level of process application, really.
Okay, so let's come to you, Gail. You are a resident GDPR lady, so I guess GDPR is all about processes, isn't it? On to an extent. So what should businesses be looking out for, and what are some of the basics they should consider in terms of your domain around GDPR and data protection?
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on something Russell said, actually, because I think planning for events rather than reacting to is a really important one, and particularly a data breach. We've been working with companies for the last few years who usually come to us once this has happened. And of course, if you had a bit of a process in place before it happened, it wouldn't be quite so bad. So having kind of disaster recovery in place, and even an incident response, even if it's just, this is what's going to happen if we have a data breach. We will call the IT company, we'll call the data protection company. But having the plan in place beforehand will save you a lot of heartache and stress when it actually ever happens. And so yeah, having those sorts of things in place, but more generally, I think it's important for a business, especially if they're scaling, to have these processes in place, because ultimately a business owner, if they do want to sell it, for example, they want to be able to step away from the business. So making sure that the business can run by itself, and all the processes are documented is a really good thing to have in place in order to sort of achieve that sale long term. But certainly when I go into business, I'll do a data audit, and I will be looking at their policies that they have in place and the processes. And that can be anything from zero. I talked to a manufacturing company last week with 80 staff with 0 policies in place. And it's amazing that they've got to that size and have nothing in place. So it's quite hard to then retrofit everything in, because as we say, businesses do business in a certain way, and they've probably been doing it that way for a very long time, in this case 40 years. So trying to then establish processes retrospectively is quite difficult. So having those in at the beginning is a much better plan, I think.
No, I can imagine. I'm building on what you said there. I mean, certainly if you're looking to exit your business at some point, a lot of small businesses are in the predicament where for most small businesses, it relies on 1 or maybe 2 people, for that business to sustain itself and go forward. And ultimately, that doesn't make it very saleable if the whole nature of the business is reliant on that individual. So certainly putting things in place so you can processize, is that a word? It is now. How the business works and make it independent of you, which I think is the basis of the E-Myth revisited by Michael Gerber, well worth a read. Then I think that's important going forward. Chris, so you're in the IT world. What's your experience of processes or lack thereof within small businesses, and what sort of things should they be doing in, I guess, the IT and cybersecurity world?
Strangely enough, not dissimilar to Gail's, given that they're the same company. But no, in 18 years of doing this job now, it is frightening how many companies don't have processes. They run, in some cases, 24/7. They don't have a process for downtime. At some point, a computer is going to break, and if we're monitoring the systems, we know when it's going to happen, or to some extent, we know when it's likely to happen. So your hardware is going to fail at some point. If we can see that coming up, we'll try and put it in place. But a lot of these companies are just, we can't afford to shut down that machine. because it's key to the business. Well, that's fine, but if you don't, then your business is going to grind to a halt in a sudden way, and you're going to have no system if we don't do the preventive maintenance. So that, we wait until the we then buy the part, which could be 2-3 days down the line. I had one client many years ago. They moved to a new site. They dealt with some colleges for students, and we had to come up with a disaster plan. And what's the worst case? Bizarre, they was on the first floor of a building, but we had to go through everything from the IT point of view down to the point of, well, what happens if the building floods? Which, like, to be fair, if the building floods and it's up to your first floor, then you get in Noah's Ark because you've got a really big issue. But
yeah, that's more of a tsunami situation, I think.
Yeah, for Malcolm Park to get that far underwater, it would be quite a tsunami or devastating incident. But we had to go through that process of what we do if this happens, and we came up with a plan. And this is a time when broadband wasn't as big as it is now, and had we had the pandemic and tried to work from home, it would have been inconvenient and difficult compared to the last 2 years. But we had processes in place for it. Thankfully, we never had to call on them. But yeah, most companies, they don't think about it. Gail's nailed it. That they don't think about these things. They don't forward plan. So consequently, when the worst happens, they kind of literally left holding the baby, as it were.
Yeah, and I guess most of those things show up as some sort of distress purchase from any of you, I guess, when they realise that the processes aren't in place and the solids of it, the air conditioning, and then so what do we do now? Now we've got to go and reverse fit these systems to make sure that we can sort of carry on with our business. So does that, in terms of cybersecurity, again, are the sort of policies and procedures that businesses should ideally have and sort of disseminate to their staff to know, what not to press and what not to open, and the sort of guidelines around that?
Well, Russell, I think, will back me up on this one. That first and foremost comes down to training staff. There are various processes you need with cybersecurity, but user awareness is ultimately the first line of defense, because it only takes a member of staff to click an email link, put their details in, and suddenly they've given access to the whole email account and everything that runs off the back of that. You then, probably the best thing, we've done this with a couple of clients now, whether they go for the full accreditation or use it as a guideline, is the Cyber Essentials, which focuses on the 5 key areas for cybersecurity, user awareness being one of them. And some of our clients have gone, well, we've passed it, let's pay the extra £350 or whatever it happens to be to get the accreditation, because it looks better on your email footer on your website than not having it, having just spent all the time and money on us doing the review. And that's a really good baseline for any company.
Yeah. Again, historically, in my sort of commercial world, the fearful process accreditation was sort of like the ISO 9000 and stuff like that, which, whenever we were going to get an inspection or an audit around sort of ISO 9000, everybody used to clench, I guess is the best expression, about whether they were following these procedures. So do you still see? I don't tend to see. I know the ISO 9000 accreditation is still there, but in my head, it doesn't seem to be as prevalent in the world or in the small business world. Is that what would you say to that, Russell? Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the ISOs are more geared towards the larger organisations, because, like you say, I think the administration involved in accrediting to it is quite significant. The audits take time and effort. And is it really of any benefit to the small business to be accredited in those particular areas? And that will go down to whoever your target audience is, as to whether or not you feel the need to go down that route. But ISOs in themselves as standards need to be followed, and you do need to follow and put processes in place to be able to do that. So you have to be aware that it does add a bit of administration to you in that way.
But, just picking up on that, I mean, I'm working quite a lot of clients at the moment in the NHS supply chain, and they are asking this of businesses and even small businesses. So there's a ISO 27001, which is an IT security standard, and a lot of small businesses that I'm coming across now are either got it or working towards that, because otherwise they won't get onto NHS supply chains.
Yeah. I think that was my experience in the business I worked with. We were obliged to do it, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to tender for certain piece of business, because that was one of the badges that you needed in order to sort of like just get on the tender list at the end of the day. But yeah, to remember that fondly. The other thing, this same company actually had a new managing director come in, and I'm sure you might have been involved with this. Well, any of you might have been involved with it. And he wanted to look at as a new MD, he just wanted to look at the processes throughout the whole organisation. So it was a total solutions provider. So basically, we were providing kits of parts or pre-assembled stuff to our customers to then bolt on or put together to make some mobile vehicles or whatever it might be. And so he did this whole brown paper exercise with the post-it notes, and all around the offices were all this whole sort of process thing up on the wall for ages, which again seemed to be quite a burden at the time, because you're trying to work out how. What it did show up is the disconnect between how the business thought the processes ran, now actually the warehouse did pick and ship and pack and all those sorts of things. It's quite an interesting exercise. Is that something that any of you guys have seen done in recent times? Russ is nodding his head.
Yeah. We I went to a local authority once. I won't name which one it is, but they were doing a website refurb essentially, and they had three independent projects running in this program. And they weren't really kind of connected to each other. They weren't really talking to each other. So we did a similar thing with a bit of brown paper around a wall, and stuck all the activities on it, each one in each little lane. And I think about a third of the way along this bit of paper, there were a lot of inputs coming into one particular activity, and then a lot of outputs that came from it. And you could see that was their crucial bottleneck in the whole thing. And you could almost like illuminate the room with all the light bulbs that were going on above people's heads. It was all crikey, look how important that one is. And being able to then focus on that activity and give it the priority and the importance meant that they actually managed to get things moving eventually.
Yeah, and I'm doing exactly that with a client of mine at the moment, which is an eye clinic, and they separated from a parent company, so they were reliant before on all of their processes and systems, and now they've got to do it for themselves. So they're again starting from scratch, but with some already very embedded ways of working. So I'm doing a figurative one. I haven't actually put brown paper on the wall, though. It's much more electronic than that. But exactly that, trying to find out where all of the, particularly around cybersecurity and data protection, but it goes right up to the board as well, because the board is newly formed, and we're trying to get it sort of from the top down almost, but we're really having to push it up, because the board don't know how to operate and how to have a look at all these processes as well. So quite often it's getting the buy-in at quite a senior level for these sorts of things.
Yeah, it was an interesting exercise at the time, because I at the time I was sort of the operations manager, so all these where anything outside of sales and finance sort of fell under me, which is usually what operations means. And so yeah, we were going, as part of this exercise of getting the ISO 9000 approval, what we actually did was task the people. I remember that in the warehouse particularly, for them to record actually what the processes were that they were doing, because I think had it been tasked to me or what the system said they were meant to be doing, they were sort of like two entirely different things. Because I think my experience is that when you get software inside a business, and you guys might have something to say about this, you're fitting the business around the software if it's just an off-the-shelf thing, and sometimes that's not necessarily the best way of doing it, because that can be a hindrance rather than a help. So again, I don't know whether you guys got any comments about defining processes and trying to get software to help with that process, or a particular process.
Now that can be an issue. You are right. If you're if you take, say, account software, so I've got a range of clients that use a range of different account software. Xero, it's what we use, what a lot of companies use, especially in the small business market. It's a really good example of a bit of software that tries to fit for everyone and doesn't. I've got a couple of clients who are manufacturing. If they tried Xero, they would have to make such a drastic change to their business, literally stop manufacturing, to start using Xero, because they're taking base components to, as your previous company was doing, base components to make another product to then sell that other product. But again, they need different amounts of base products to make different products. Xero won't do that, whereas Sage Accounts, which is by far from my favorite software, does it really, really well. So they have to go with what fits their business. So going off the shelf, and if Ashish was here from Web Alliance, he would probably 110% back me up on this, is don't ever adapt your business to fit the software you just bought. Buy the software that can be adapted to the way your business works. There will inevitably be some compromise on both sides, that the software can't do something that you do, and you'll have to adjust what you do. But yeah, never work to off-the-shelf software. It just doesn't work for most people.
Yeah, I think, because with the generic off-the-shelf stuff, they build so much in to try and accommodate as wider audience. It's a bit like Microsoft Word, isn't it? We probably don't know how 80% of it works, but we just use the 10 to 20% that we know. Yet it's all there, just sort of taking up space on our machines or whatever.
Designers love it when you use that to send over your logos and stuff. If you use Microsoft Word.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Don't do that.
Just ask Marie-Louise, lovely Canva, lovely.
Anything designed on Word, I don't think graphic designers love. They'd let you off if you use Canva. Other graphic design programs are available. Anyway, digression. Oh yeah, so no, absolutely on the what had me focus on the processes in my business. I found it quite difficult was when I did get Ashish involved in looking at the software to help my business, run as it was, because I'd used various things, for those of you listening that don't know what it is, the business community has run networking groups in previous guises for the last decade or so. And when you start off, it's just emails going out, spreadsheet, collating the data, getting it on a spreadsheet, printing off the spreadsheet, stuff like that. Then you move to platforms like Eventbrite, which make it a little bit more integrated, but that can end up being costly if you're charging for events on Eventbrite. And then I used a WordPress plugin, but again, that was quite cumbersome because it got all these things built in that I didn't need. And ultimately, it was getting someone to design a piece of software to run it exactly as I wanted to, and to try and put on paper what my process was quite a sticking point for a while, because I was trying to think, how do I put it on paper that then a software developer can look at that and understand it and build a piece of software. So again, it's, if any of you got any advice to people that are either thinking of putting processes together, not necessarily for software, but just generally for their business, sometimes just staring at that blank piece of paper can be like a little bit overwhelming in the first place. So has anybody got any insights that they can share that would help?
Me and Gail did this December, I think it was last year. We sat down with a external third party, and we ran through everything. We ran through what we did. It's because it's the old phrase, you can't see the wood for the trees. You're so close to to what you're doing that you just need to step back. And sometimes having a third party who's completely external to the company, it might be something but somebody external to the company, they can ask you those questions from their point of view that you can then expand on. Because when you're that close, if you can't step back and see it, then you'll never see it. Whereas the third party can help you kind of take that step back. So I'd say, find a trusted partner, or I don't want to say business coach, because that's nothing to knock you, Paul, but I don't think a business coach is quite the right person. But find somebody.
I am here, right, Paul. I am here.
And I'm here too. I can do this kind of stuff.
It doesn't have to be a business coach, because some business coaches, not knocking you, Paul, because I know you've been through the mill with businesses and employment. Some business coaches, they have got many failed businesses and have just found that they're now a business coach because that's the only thing they can seem to do. You want someone who's got got the knowledge, has been successful in what they do, to be there for you. And I would happily sit down with someone like you, Paul, and run through it, because I know you've got the experience.
Yeah, but you couldn't afford me, Chris. So, so Russell, do you have anything to add from a perspective of where do people start? Because as Gail said earlier, there are companies that have been in business for a long time that just don't have anything in place. So somehow they've managed to wing it without anything formal in place. So have you got any advice for people? If they were starting from a blank page, what's the first step, or what are some of the fundamentals they should look at?
Well, I think you've always got to look at what you're trying to achieve. So what is your end objectives really, and then kind of break it down from there, and find the components then, and then you can think of the activities that you need to get you to that kind of position. But what I find with a lot of organisations is that yes, you can sit and you can think about this, but if you don't know where you're going, then once you start, it's a bit like watching a team of 9-year-old children playing football. All of a sudden, everybody gathers around the ball, and it just seems to be a moving scrum around the pitch without any kind of direction to it. So I think once you've had a bit of experience of running, is then looking at how you deal with that as a business. So then you could start to think of the activities you need to do to get you to what you need to achieve.
Mm.
And then there is the perfect world that I teach, the kind of best practice frameworks that will tell you what it's like on Planet Perfect. But then we don't live on Planet Perfect. So, it's then a case of looking at how things work for you and looking at best practice areas. And for those of us that read business books every now and then, any business book will tell you the perfect world. And it's about then combining those two things together to say, okay, how can we improve as an organization using that kind of best practice or that business book perfect world scenario, and adapt that to improve what we do.
Yeah, there's an interesting book called Traction. I can't remember the author, but that's quite a good framework for building and developing a business. It is very much process driven. So if someone hasn't even looked at the processes and how they should be in a business, I'd recommend sort of reading that book, because it does give a framework and it does give some practical examples of how to start to structure or how to implement a proper structure and process within any business.
Yeah, and a bit like what Chris and Gail were saying about don't adapt your business to the tool. So even though you read it in a book, don't adapt your business to fit a solid process. It's got to be the other way around. So you've got to adapt the process to where you are, and that's the way to make it work, really.
Yeah, I think
unless the process is wrong, obviously. So
unless the process. Yeah, I mean, I was teaching some guys in Malta a couple of weeks ago, and the expression that I always got banged back at me, even though I'm kind of training a best practice framework, they all said to me, "But in Malta, it works like this." Well, yeah, okay, but if you want to make things better, then you've got to take your "but in Malta" bit and adapt it to, a best practice way of doing it. But again, it's about applying it appropriately, because if you try and where I see things go wrong is where processes are applied inappropriately in organizations. They're either too light or they're too heavy.
Mm. Yeah, or there's a lot of duplication within a business. Particularly between software not talking to each other, or departments not talking to each other, or all those sorts of things crop up, don't they?
None of that ever happens.
I think that comes back to what we talked about earlier, trying to get these processes established as early on in the business life cycle as you can, so that as it grows, the processes grow with it, rather than having to try and retrofit everything at a later stage.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, if you are a small business out there, and even if you're only a one-person band, I think looking at sometimes documenting some of the regular often done processes within your business, partly to consider, you know, if you do want to exit at some point, how do you make your business independent of you? And it is going to need a sort of manual, for want of a better expression, you know, for someone to come in and be able to replicate your business without you. But also, you know, as I touched on earlier, what I found useful was doing that, be it a checklist or a flowchart or a combination of whatever, to enable someone to either develop some software to do the administrative tasks for you, which gives you time back, which we all you know, only have a finite amount of, or actually look at how to outsource something. So, you know, it's, if you've got that thing in place, you know, it's then quite easy to hand over to a HR person or a virtual assistant or whoever it is, again, in order to free your time up to focus on your business. So, yeah, certainly in that journey I had, I'm much more focused on what are the processes, how does this actually work, you know, how do I document it, how do I share that, and, you know, what sort of services can I bring in, be it software development or outsource services. Not easy to say on a Tuesday. So, so before we wrap this up, then, has anybody got any sort of like final advice or comments for anybody tuning in around processes that we haven't covered already?
I think one thing I would say is that they need to be reviewed. You know, once you put processes in place, companies change over time. So don't think once you've done it once, that's it. You know, keep these things under review. Are they still relevant to how you work? Do they need to be changed? So yeah, just keeping it under review once you have put some processes in place, I think is important.
Yeah, and I think there's also the danger of it, you know, like a lot of people do with business plans, they'll write it and then never go back to it, you know, so they just feel they've ticked the box. So again, it's no point in just having the folder on your shelf with everything in there if you're not reviewing it and not checking that it's current and not evolving it over time as things change within your business. Because certainly as a business grows, and in my experience, as I've grown, the processes do adapt, and you need to use different tools and different outsourced services in order to deliver essentially the same thing. But it's a, you know, it's a larger and different organisation. Anything else from you, Russell?
No, I think I'd probably back Gail up with that. Make sure we're all kind of like constantly looking at what we do, and even if a process is working well, we still need to review it from time to time to say, could we do it even better?
Yeah, but it's sometimes those small incremental changes, isn't it, that can make a lot of difference. I remember doing, I can't remember what it's called way back when, this is going back a few years, where we were looking at sort of like a quality manual inside the business, and we were looking at techniques like Kaizen philosophy. We won't go into that now, but you know, it's just looking at what sort of small percentage change can you make each time, which over time will make a massive difference. So yeah, there's things and philosophies out there that you can use and implement to look at, you know, those small changes that ultimately will add up over time across the different pillars of your business. Chris, anything from you?
Other than backing up what the others have said, I mean, the last, I think, 2.5 years should have taught pretty much every business owner that things can change at the drop of a hat, and you've got to be prepared for that. So yeah, constantly reviewing processes, because if we go back 3 years when COVID was this distant thing in China that people were hearing once or twice on the news, I don't think anyone was thinking, you know, in 6 months' time, 4 months' time, we're going to be working from home. So they weren't reviewing the processes in planning forward. So I think the last 3 years has certainly been an eye opener, and should be taken on board that, yeah, things need to be reviewed often, and disaster planning is a real key thing for processing.
Yeah, I mean, as we've said on these before, you know, the small business world, they're quite a tough crowd. They've had quite a lot of stuff thrown at them over the last sort of 2.5 years, you've said, Chris. And I think, you know, that there's still sort of potential uncertainty going forward. But I think, you know, anything you've got in place that, I guess, consolidates your foundation, be it, you know, business planning, processes, etc., etc. Business recovery has got to help you going forward. Has got to help you adapt. And as things change, maybe your processes and the way you do things need to change as well. So definitely worth keeping that in mind. So thanks for your time today, guys. Thanks for those that tuned in. There are a few comments from Anthony and I Cook You Serve, so thank you for that. Yeah, we're here every week at 11 a.m. just looking at a particular topic with a different set of faces each time. So